It was a rare view, the earth rising over the white cratered horizon, that place my people found over 2 centuries ago that gave us so much, our salvation in so many ways. To see it when it was whole, I can't imagine. There are pictures, hollow cash projections of a blue and green marble hanging in the darkness. In my mind, it's impossible to overlay such a gleaming paradise over the cracked, blackened rock before me now. The water had long evaporated into salt oceans or frozen into glacial plains that bury forgotten cities. Nothing green lives there anymore. How could something live on a planet where a continent-sized chunk of the surface floats just beyond low orbit, held in place by cooled magma from the exposed core? It looked like some kind of tumor, tethered by strings of calcified flesh. When my people, the Kokori, stumbled across it, it terrified us. What species could have done this to their own planet? Our fear only mounted when we actually explored the place. Unlike us, unlike the other dozen members in the coalition, these humans hadn't evolved into the shape nature appeared to favor. Instead of an exoskeleton, they had skin, no pincers, but hands with manipulator digits called fingers, 2 legs, not the 6 or 8. They even had a term for evolution, choosing the path that all sentient life up to that point had followed. Carcinization, a path that the humans spat on, it seemed. So, these fleshy mammals instilled fear in sapiens for their sheerly alien nature. In the end, that fear turned to hope. "Hey, Rish," came the clicks from our pilot. She was an Akaraka, her people like mine, save for a tendon and neural system that made them exceptional pilots and shots. My xenoculture classes, a lifetime ago it seems, taught that first contact was an absolute nightmare. We thought we'd find some kind of unsanctioned colony, not a new species. "What is it, Preela?" I asked, scuttling from my position at the window. "We're coming up to the coordinates," she reported, guiding our small scouting corsair across the lunar surface. When whatever happened to the Earth, the moon endured a lot of blowback. The side that took the burnt of the cataclysm looked more like a collection of glass spires than the cratered, pale face depicted in what historical documents we could find. Preela, for her part, swerved smoothly between the reaching fingers of obsidian slag at a speed I couldn't have managed on my best day. I scanned the navigational display. She was, of course, correct that we were here. But here was just as nondescript as it sounded. Whatever we were looking for lay buried under the frozen remnants of Earth's violent end. "All right," I said, looking at the topographical display. "Start a search pattern, scan for rarefied alloys and minerals. With any luck, we'll narrow our target down to a few spires in a couple hours. Or I can do what we did on our last dig in Seattle," she offered, before I reminded her how that fiasco ended. She'd spun the ship, plasma batteries charged, and started firing. Yeehaw! Our immediate surroundings exploding around us in a furious barrage of black glass. I had to hold on for dear life, the faulty inertial dampers on this barely functional bucket incapable of keeping up with Preela's escapades. With one final sweep of the thruster to clear the debris, she slowed us to where I could release my pincer from the console. I rose on 8 shaky legs to tear into my foolhardy pilot, but stopped. "It worked?" Preela said, apparently as stunned as me to find a small structure at the center of our freshly cleared crater. "Ha! I knew it would work!" "What the actual glark was that?" came the shouts from our drop bay. Butters, a fellow Kokori and peerless calm technician, clicked his pincers in annoyance. "Preela, who watches far, far too much human media, found our target," I called back. "Get ready to crack it open." I turned to Preela, giving her my assent to start docking. Docking was a colorful term for opening our bay, dropping on top of the freshly revealed structure, and making as good a seal as we could with the lunar surface. The process went as smoothly as could be hoped, allowing us unfettered access to the sealed bulkhead. It led into a squat, angled slab of derricrete. As entrances go, it was discreet, so far as humans were concerned, clearly meant to be hidden, to lead into a bunker below the surface. "Hello, gorgeous," Butters said, walking up with his telecom rig, tapping away to trick the door into thinking we were all humans. Tell me your secrets. Content that our door cracker was set to task, I turned my attention to the last of our cadre. Prila, where's Garth? I asked, wanting him ready to go. The Brackthor was the muscle of our group. His people enjoyed bigger frames, thicker in the shell, and strong enough to haul extra armor around like nothing. They made for excellent thugs, and Garth shone as a pinnacle example. Putting on his party gear, Prila reported, just as the massive crustacean lumbered into the cargo bay from the crew quarters. He had a pair of back-mounted plasma emitters and a steel hydraulic pincer over his main claw. I imagine few could strike a more intimidating figure, coming up to half the height of the door Butters currently swore at. Need something, Rish? He asked me in the slow, lumbering fashion he did nearly everything. He may not have been my favorite decapod, but he was steady in an oddly calming way. Prila's attempt at a G-force training probably hadn't even made him slide across the floor. Nothing specific. I clicked my pincers in the negative. Just wanted you ready for when Butters... FTL ripple detected. Prila tapped at her console with the tip of her pincer, showing subspace warping, out by the largest gas giant of the system. The computer is trying to decide which signature it matches. It's not good either way, I grumbled. This wasn't a strictly legal outing, but I still hoped it was the coalition government. The alternative was far, far worse. Butters, are you almost done down there? I shouted down to the cargo bay. Oh, let me check. He chittered back at me with a helping of sarcasm that bordered on the violent. It was going to take me another hour to open, but since you opted to interrupt me, I think that'll cut the time down by half. Hey, could you shout at me again in 5 minutes? I'm sure it'll help a bunch. He waved his pincers at the over 2-meter-high door of duplex steel, parts still cooling from Prila's excavation efforts. We've got contact. I deadpanned back. His snark was partly nerves, I knew. That was a big risk for a potentially species-saving score. I still wanted to climb down from the bridge to snip at him. Does that help a bunch? Glark, he swore, moving back to his data slate, furiously clicking. With Butters appropriately motivated, I moved to check my own equipment. Habit, really. My archaeotranslation display was just starting diagnostics when... Signature confirmed. The solid cold in Prila's voice, the fear, told me everything. That FTL ripple she detected, it wasn't the coalition coming to shut down an illegal dig. Alfheim. The name of our enemy hung in the air of the ship, a single species that found us in the darkness. We thought that maybe, like the dozen other times we'd found others in the night sky, this would be a joyous occasion. Open arms, messages of peace, diplomats and emissaries. All of it cast aside. Our ships were destroyed to a vessel. Even the escape pods and emergency shuttles were corralled. Everything pulled into the Alfheim cruisers. We thought that some kind of accidental quirk of space had swallowed the whole diplomatic team. Surely this new species couldn't be so cruel. They made certain to clarify that. The only response we received was, "The insects will be purged." It wasn't until later that we found out the Alfheim weren't crustaceans like us. They were something else. We didn't have taxonomic terms for it. They were luminous, always glowing creatures with tendrils that wafted in the air. Our first true look at them came when one, and only one, crashed into the coalition outpost on the edge of our space. It had a form we recognized, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with those weightless tendrils draping from it, so much like the humans, but still so different. Too long, too many joints, and a mouth that opened far, far too wide. It killed every single living creature on that outpost. The thing was strong enough to rip a Brackthor in half, fast enough to make an Akaraka look sluggish. Nobody was spared, and the outpost was ripped from its orbital tethers, pulled away like that diplomatic fleet. And it went on that way, continues to this day. Drones, at most a dozen Alfheim laying waste to settlements, ships, stations, worlds burned, shattered, resources stolen away into the night. Some survived the attacks long enough to send signals, desperate pleas for help, and, in one case, a picture of the Alfheim world. It made sense then, at least some. The planet was massive, but not naturally so. They stole it from us to add on to it, like some megalithic structure. We of the coalition terraformed. We found planets, increased the water content, purified air, and made it a new home. What they did was pyroforming, taking from others to build into their own singular world, the only place sacred enough for the Alfheim to live, but they needed resources to expand it for their growing population, so they ate the structures of other species to make room. They also ate us. A lot of monstrous mouths to feed on a planet that size, and they could do it at leisure. All of our first contacts were peaceful, a pattern we expected to continue. Our technology was geared towards medicine, art, building, and learning. We didn't have much in the way of weapons, and what we did had languished underdeveloped for centuries. They came at us with ships that could split stations, and we had some experimental beam-emitting rifles that needed a team of 3 to use. So we turned to the only other thing that even vaguely resembled the Alfheim, hoping that similar evolution may yield similar technology, something we could use to fight them. The Exploratory Corps was founded with the express duty of scouring all human settlements and colonies. It worked, too. The humans had weapons we could scarcely understand, lances of plasma, fission reactions concentrated into unimaginable explosions, railguns. If there was a way to destroy something, the humans had found it, built and refined it. It was a widely held belief that their own cradle world was the victim of some overzealous new means of killing. It was that, the planet cracker, that everyone searched for, why entire teams drilled through glacial ice, burrowed through salt dunes, and braved radioactive ghost towns. It was the guiding hope of our people. By the time I was conscripted into the Corps, fresh out of the state-funded Xenoanthropology Collegiate, every colony had already been picked over. The ruins of Mars had given their last exosuite. Venus cleft to her secrets, divulged her last rail cannon. Earth, everyone thought, had no more nuclear stones left unturned, but we still hadn't found it. And desperation is a singular motivator for unreasonable errands. I went on 23 digs over 2 continents. We uncovered much of what we expected to find: well-trod and known devices, cryogenic suspension caskets, waste and water recyclers, semi-sentient computational systems, things my people and the coalition were well versed in before our hope-fueled grave robbing, and things we were superior at, if not peers to humanity. It all seemed a waste until I found something. A journal. Innocuous, except that the dated pages were the closest thing to the end of humanity that I had ever seen. Our scientists estimated that these people went extinct over 5 millennia past, and the final entry of this book held records that may have been written in humanity's last hour. To whoever finds this, know that we tried to stop. Know that not all of us wanted this. As much of our final treasure was laid in the heart of Luna, may it be the seed of some future I will never see. That and the coordinates a map to follow, a map that led to this set of stairs. "Rish," Preela said, knocking me from my fear-induced stupor. "I'll stay here. Keep the engines cool and the guns hot. If everything goes well, then they'll fly right by us, yeah? We're a tiny ship on a ball of glass and dust." She was trying to convince herself, I knew, but I clicked a pincer in the affirmative. "Even if they do see us," I added, giving her a playful salute before climbing down into the bay. "We've got the best shot on this side of the Crab Nebula." "If you two are done courting," Butters called from his data slate, "I really deserve an audience for when I do this." Butters hit a final button, commanding the door open. The metal ground against fine particles of dust, sliding down into the surface like a growl of some hungry monster. Stale, millennia-old air buffeted us, hot in our faces, sending crushed glass and white powder into little whirlwinds at our feet. Dim red light spilled out of the open maw, illuminating a set of human stairs that plummeted into the moon. "Okay," I breathed out, shaky, elated, and scarred in equal measure. "Butters, you lead the group. Sensors forward. I don't want us stumbling into any human security measures. Garth at the rear. I want all 8 of your eyes out for guns, hostiles, local fauna, anything that might impede us. No shooting unless we're being shot at, or Butters gives you the all-clear to engage." We knew the deal. The plan had long been hashed out before we'd boarded this ship. It just felt calming, I suppose, to double-check that everyone knew what the next steps were. "Preela?" I called back to the bridge. We'd worked together for a while in the same exploratory unit on Earth. I wanted her to give me that playful salute back, tell me she knew her job, that I should go do mine. Instead, she focused on the sky, at the dark, at any number of those stars that may actually be our doom racing to consume us. We started down the stairs, our goodbyes unsaid. "So, fearless leader?" Butters called from ahead as we walked down to the massive corridor. The stairs had gone down a lot longer than any of us expected, featureless duracrete and red light. It only ended in another blast door after I'd begun wondering if we died, and this was our eternal afterlife. Butters had made quicker work with this door than the one before, already getting used to the security protocols of the bunker. "What is it, Butters?" I asked, looking out for signage, insignias, anything that may direct our way. "I want to know. What do you think we're going to find?" he asked as we came up to a third door. "I think," Garth said, though Butters interrupted with, "Garth, buddy, don't hurt yourself." Thankfully, the large crustacean was professional enough not to rise to the barb physically, or perhaps it was just par for them. They'd clearly worked together long before they were attached to Preela and me for this mission. "I'll hurt you. Keep talking like that," he returned instead. "I think it's a cannon, maybe. A really, really big one. Something like a mech suit Type 7, shoulder-mounted particle emitter, but bigger." His slow, deep voice rumbled through the corridor behind us. Butters called back, the door opening with a hiss of humid air, refreshing in the shockingly dry hallway. "It can't be a cannon. How could they crack their damned planet with some souped-up gun?" We walked into an antechamber, just as tall, but with 4 pathways branching off. These, thankfully, were labeled. While I set to work, Butters and Garth continued their chittering. "Aim the supergun at the ground," Garth shrugged. "I think a species smart enough to accelerate a tungsten rod to 1/4 the speed of light would maybe, just maybe, be smart enough not to aim their supergun at their own foot," Butters returned. Garth, clashing with my earlier assertion at his professionalism, aimed a plasma emitter at Butters' feet and fired a very low pulse. It was just enough to cause some static and light, but it had the technicians scuttling away in an awkward dance. "I think," he shot back, tone making it clear his idea was far less foolish, "that it's some kind of virus. The Cartilin flu never cracked a planet." Garth chuckled in the grinding clicks that passed as laughter for his people. "A computer virus, you chitinous lump. A replicating piece of software so malignant it turns the humans' own arsenals against them." Butters' idea had some merit. We'd found instructions for digital weapons of that kind in the wreckage of Earth. The military use aside, the propaganda videos of Alfheim drones shooting each other down was very cathartic to the populace. They'd adapt, but every bit helped. Their conversation was, of course, missing some key details I had neglected to give them. So while they debated, I read. The rooms were labeled in the English subtype of Terran languages. "North American, best guess," I mumbled, clicking through my archaeolog. There were symbols I was familiar with almost right away. Pointing, I said, "That one says medical prep, and that one is operations." The second one was most promising. If we could find the nerve hub of the base, then we wouldn't have to bumble around in this bunker for too long. We may even be able to get back to the Corsair before the Alfheim got past Mars. "That's lovely. Now we know where to go if we need a Band-Aid," Butters grumbled. Again, I blamed it on nerves. While we hadn't known each other long, I'm good at learning about people. It's my literal job, in a sense. Garth and Butters were frontliners, until they were semi-legally co-opted for this mission. Garth dealt with the molt-inducing stress of battle by going over mech suit manuals in nauseating detail. Butters sniped and grumbled. Even understanding that, his constant jibes rankled. "That one is labeled plumbing and electrical." I then pointed to the final door, knowing this would get his attention. "The last one is Armory 1. Garth didn't bother talking, instead bustling past me to the indicated door with Butters hot on his hind legs. It was a poorly kept secret that they were here for a payday of truly monumental proportions. Enough for an enterprising technician and his pet thug to enjoy a retirement far, far from the front line. They knew that if we uncovered something worthwhile, They could name their price for the effort. I did my job when I found that journal. I filled out the reports, flagged the potential gains. My superiors didn't think a junior digger would come up with much and thought my journal was the end of days ramblings from some insane human. We scanned the moon 1,000 times, then 1,000 times more. None of the rare or exotic materials, signals, decaying radiological signatures, no structures on the surface, not like Venus or Mars, or even the barely developed colony on Titan, not worth the resources. That it felt different didn't matter. Preela thankfully believed me. What's more, she knew some less scrupulous officers that could steal just enough resources, fake just enough clearance to get a mission like this off the ground. So, I was given Butters, Garth, and this ship. Preela was able to vouch for me as the onboard xenocultural expert. "Hey, Rish," Garth called out from the armory. I was just letting them meander around, get it out of their system. I'd gone through at least a few bunkers, found some armories. There were usually a small room with a few weapons.
"You wanna look at this?"
This was not a small room. It was a space as big as a cruiser's docking bay. Maybe the whole cruiser, actually. It was lined with racks of armor, rifles, and
mech suits.
Garth sounded more like a child on his first molting than a 70-kilo pile of muscle and chitin. There had to be almost 3 dozen of these things.
"Butters, think you can get one of these online for me?"
I was about to tell him not to bother. We didn't have time for that. A quick look at the place, sure. While this was definitely a find, we'd had access to weapons like this from Earth proper. Unfortunately, I was interrupted by my comms crackling to life. My comms screeched out static. It must have been Preela, but we were nearly a kilometer underground. If there was enough lunar crust to keep our best ships from finding this trove, it would be impossible for any signal to make it through an intelligible state. Still, the message came through in another way. A colossal bang rattled through the bunker. We could hear rubble crashing down the hallway. "Preela!" I ran out to the antechamber, legs scrambling across the floor. Back down the long, red-lit hall. I could see a cloud of dust obscuring the stairs. I felt a light wind pick up in the stale, moist air, atmosphere leaking through what was left of our ship, and the rubble plugging up the bunker entrance. I almost started running back down the hall. Maybe she was trapped in the debris. She could have run through the entrance before the ship was hit. Then both of my stomachs dropped. A glow, white and made from pure malice, shone through the dust. It confirmed there was nothing left to save of Preela. She was dead. If she was lucky, anyway.
Butters!
I shouted back.
"Get one of those suits working for Garth!"
I rushed up to the door. It wasn't my forte, but closing a door was much easier than opening one. My nightmare floated down the stairs as I panicked through my attempt at saving our lives. Long, spindly, bright, and graceful. Looking for all the world like an angel of humans' mythology. Then the mouth opened, filled with teeth, hinging the head almost in half. When the door closed, the Alfheim started flying towards us. That monster hit the door so hard, I felt it through the door. It held, though, and I felt myself hope, until the door started to glow, too. Dull orange shifting to red, then to the bright white that haunted all of my people. I ran. A beam of light ripped through the steel. It instantly cooked one of my legs, even as it missed. A line of molten derricrete gouged in its wake. I slid across the floor, cracking up against the far wall. While I tried to check if any of my hearts had failed, I watched. One hand, then another, reached through the freshly minted hole in the door. The metal folded like wet paper under its touch, melting away. It saw me through the expanding window, a finger pointed, light coalescing about the tip, blinding and hungry. Garth took the shot on the arm of his newly activated mech suit. In a sudden rush, he thrust a colossal steel fist through the door. The sound was overwhelming and dust filled the room. I rose, later realizing it was Butters pulling me to my feet. He may have said something. I may have responded. It didn't matter as Garth was pushed back at us and we all crashed into one of the other rooms. Pipes and cables hugged the walls. The plumbing room, I thought numbly. Butters and I oriented in time to watch the monster peel the mech suit open with a terrible screech of shearing metal. Garth fired his shell-mounted plasma cannons. They did less than a light wind. His screams filled the room as a white-hot hand ripped his claw away. Somehow, he had enough in him to aim his cannon one last time. He fired, and a hole appeared in the pipe next to Butters and I, wide enough for us to squeeze through. I pulled Butters with me, vanishing into the torrent of water the pipe contained. We were washed away. It's impossible, I know, but his screams lingered, following us through the deluge and into the oblivion of unconsciousness. I awoke at the bottom of a massive water tank, Butters giving me a shake. He pointed his claw up, and we swam sluggishly to the surface. We breached, getting out onto a gangway of corrugated steel in what appeared to be an empty void otherwise. "Hey," Butters said, forcing me to stand. "Sorry. I would have let you sleep more, but I need your particular brand of nerd." "How long?" "Not sure." He was already moving down the gantry, leaving me to limp after. "Your bell got rung a little harder than mine, but I still blacked out. Best I figure, 2 hours or so. Long enough for me to wake up, come up here, and find this." He pointed down a gantry lined with those red lights in a low fog. Even with the lights, I couldn't see the other side, like a bridge to nowhere. Around us was another room of pipes, pumps, monitoring stations, and cables, like the plumbing room where... "Garth," I whispered, realization coming slowly. "No. Listen to me." Butters nipped me with a claw, breaking me out of my spiral. "He's gone. Preela's gone. And we're next. Unless you put that away for later and follow me." It was sometimes hard to remember the flippin' crab was a frontliner. He'd probably seen a lot of his friends end at the hands of the Alfheim. "Yes, of course," I said, trying to find some fractional sliver of his confidence. You needed a nerd?" We started the walk across the massive bridge. The echoes of our chitin on steel fell away into the darkness. It wasn't long before we couldn't see where we'd come from. Butters urged me forward, supporting where my crooked leg wouldn't. After what seemed like an eternity, I understood why Butters needed my help. In what I presumed to be the center of the gangway was a circular observation deck, 10 meters across. Workstations lined the outer periphery of the space, and at its center was a cryopod. I ran as best as I could, climbing atop the reclined machine, hoping. "It's a human," Butters confirmed as I looked down through the clear domed cover. A thin layer of frost had been scraped off the glass, probably by a curious Butters. I started searching for a means of reanimating her, scuttling along the workstations. "Over here," Butters called. "Why I need your brand of nerd. My data slate got crushed. I can't interfere with the code, but you can read these human scribbles, right?" He pointed a claw at a small yellow square of paper, shockingly well preserved. "Press play" was all it read. I hit the corresponding button on the workstation. All of the screens came to life, code running on all of them, except one, where a female human sat down, the same one in the pod behind us. "Hello," she said, tired. I've seen thousands of pictures or videos of humans. This one was one of their soldiers. Her arms were thick with muscle, visible through the skin-tight black Cairo suit. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you know. So let me explain our sins. I just hope you understand." We started looking for other places to settle, to get out of our system. We wanted to go farther, faster. A new FTL technology brought colonists, a huge seed ship, out to the system in Kepler 1606. We thought it went well. She laughed to herself, but it was sad, a whimper of pain hidden in a thin coat of humor. We don't know what it was. Best guess is some local solar radiation, but the ones who came back were wrong. They were taller, thinner, graceful in a lot of ways. They were also sharper, meaner. It took an embarrassingly short time for them to convince too many of us that they were the next step in evolution, put on just enough of a smile to hide the sharpening teeth. They filled the colony ships to bursting, eager to go to New Alfheim, become fucking space elves. There were a few of those things who stayed behind. proselytizing, convincing stragglers, cajoling, and sometimes good old threatening, when they got as many of us as they thought they could. She stopped speaking for a while. Instead, she just stared at her limp hands, as though lamenting something they should have been able to hold together, something that should have been safe in her grasp, something now gone. They detonated about a third of the nuclear weapons stores on the planet, literally sent South America into orbit. Something between a sob and a laugh escaped her. A mania, some kind of madness, threatened to slip into her eyes, but it was fought back, put into the little box I was even now, storing the grief of loss in. As evolved as these Alfheim fuckers thought themselves to be, they were still afraid of us. Thankfully, some of us saw that. My mother was one of them. She laid the foundation for our future using an old Seed World initiative. Now we're hiding, and I'm waiting for you. You've already started the process. Soon The recording was cut off when a beam of light sliced the monitor in half. I scrambled backward against the pod. Back down the gangway was the Alfheim, silently gliding through the air. Parts of their suit were no longer glowing, damaged in the fight with Garth. The clear polymer revealed gray, wet, and wrinkled flesh, mottled with writhing bumps. A face that was human in only the most abstract senses, with a mouth too wide and deep red eyes that bulged too much. Butters walked forward. I wanted to go to him, drag him back. Maybe he hadn't been seen yet. "I found the human for you," Butters said loudly, standing in the middle of the gangway. "So, you'll pay up, right? Leave Kokiri Prime alone, until me and 10 generations of my brood pass?" Oh no. Preela was right. There should have been no reason for an Alfheim ship to find us. There was no reason for an Alfheim ship to even be here. Butters, he betrayed us.
You did well, pet,
The monster said, leaning down, resting a hand on Butters. I wanted to rush over and rip his claws off. The monster beat me to it. Butters started screaming as he cooked, his shell turning bright red where the Alfheim touched, then black, then to ash.
"Gods do not honor deals with insects,"
It said, moving to the pod, ignoring me to raise a finger at the human inside.
"Goodbye, Kus Arch."
I didn't even realize what had happened, but my claw was clutched around its ankle. I squeezed with all my might, feeling the flesh under the glowing polymer give. The thing hissed in rage, pointing the ball of light at me. To my great shock, I didn't die. A fist rocketed out of the pod, grabbed hold of the Alfheim and pulled. Screams filled the space, echoing off walls impossibly far away. Monstrous death cries like a demon being devoured. Then, a sudden crack, like a shell split in one blow. The flailing Alfheim went limp, sliding from the glass dome. It landed in a wet heap in front of me, head bent and misshapen. Even uglier than I remember, came the human voice from the recording. She hopped to the ground, reddish-purple blood covering her black cryosuit. She saw me and raised an eyebrow. "Hey, little fella, do you understand me?" I clicked in the affirmative, but then stopped. My mouth parts weren't good at forming human words, but I managed a yes, or at least an approximation. Then, a thank you of sorts pointing at the Alfheim. "Oh, that was my pleasure, crab cake." She moved off to a workstation, after that hitting buttons, bringing more of the computers to life. I followed, worked up the mixture of effort and nerve to ask what I desperately needed to know. "Human, your treasure, your weapon. Can you help us?" She looked down at me, hand on a lever. Then, out of an infinite blackness, a smile split her lips. "Humanity's greatest treasure and our greatest weapon?" She pulled the lever, illuminating the darkness. What I had thought to be low fog was actually the tops of clouds. What was under the gantry? Cryopods. They lined the inside of, well, there was no other way to say it. It was the inside of the moon. The moon was hollowed out, the interior surface filled with billions of stasis pods. It's always been its people.